Hello, everyone. Today's warm-up is going to be an introduction to narratology, which is probably a new word for most of you. I'm going to introduce you to a branch of literary theory that we call narratology, and I would like you to use the presentation to help you fill in the blanks on the guided notes that you have pasted into your notebook. Our sources for today are the Cambridge Introduction to Narrative, the Oxford English Dictionary, Purdue OWL, and Apex 1.1.2. I'm using them for certain definitions that you will see in the following slides. Okay, are we ready? Pencils in hands. Here we go. Starting with literary theory. What is it? It is a field of study concerned with evaluating, analyzing, and understanding literary works, according to the OED. People who do literary theory are called critics or literary critics, and they use different lenses to view and talk about art, literature, and even culture. Um, there's a long list of different lenses a critic can use. The two ones that we'll talk about are structuralism and post-structuralism, but there are many, many more. There's ways of reading, like with a Marxist lens, or a feminist lens, or a queer lens, for example. Um, if you think of the word lens, you can think of a camera, right? Which is a device that you attach or detach a lens to so that you can take a different type of picture, or you can focus from close up or from far away. And so we like to use this word lens to describe what is happening in literary theory. Okay, so two types of lenses are structuralism and post-structuralism. Now, these are big words, they're academic words that you don't necessarily need to know. But if you get into college and you start studying English literature, you will probably encounter teachers and professors who talk in these terms. So, first, structuralism, which looks for underlying elements in culture and literature that can be connected to develop general conclusions about individual works and the systems from which they emerge. Um, it tries to find what all stories have in common, tries to analyze large amounts of stories, pick out the things that they share, and then use those shared elements to come up with, as it says, general conclusions or theories about the systems from which they emerge. So basically, finding what everything has in common. Narratology, which is today's subject, is a branch of structuralism. And a lot of the way that we teach literature in high school tends to be more structuralist. We are trying to build up a system in your mind that later in life you might try and tear down, which is what post-structuralists do. Um, post-structuralism looks at the ways and places where systems break down. Um, People who engaged in this type of criticism argue that structuralist systems are fictitious constructs that cannot be trusted to develop meaning or give order. So they're people who are more inclined to doubt systems, to want to tear down systems, to say that any system we come up with is made up and cannot be trusted. Um, the big divide here, a lot of literary critics were structuralists more in the 40s, 1940s, and 1950s, and then in the 60s and the 70s, with some countercultural revolutions in America, more and more scholars started becoming post-structuralists and became interested in sort of breaking systems down. So, this is the first one on your notes. Narratology is the systematic study of narrative. Um, the suffix ology means study. For example, biology is the study of life. So narratology is the study of narrative. And there's a few key figures in this branch of study. From Wikipedia, quote, the theoretical lineage of narratology is traceable to Aristotle, but modern narratology is agreed to have begun with Russian formalists like Vladimir Prop and Mikhail Bakhtin. Um, Aristotle wrote Poetics, which is a treatise on dramatic structure in Greek tragedies. He tried to look at a lot of different Greek tragedies and figure out what they had in common. Vladimir Prop tried to do a similar thing with Russian folktale stories. He read a lot of them and wrote about their key sort of irreducible elements. So that is narratology. Narrative, this is a huge word in our classroom, is the representation or telling of a story. So narrative does not equal story. They are not the same things. As we'll see on the next slide, I'll tell you what story is, but for now, narrative is just telling or representing a story. A narrator is someone who tells a story. So, story and plot. A story, then, is a series of events involving entities. Those are kind of the two main things that a story needs: events and entities. More on those in the next slides. A plot is not a story, it is a part of a story. A plot then is a series of events that make up, quote, what happens in a story. The same story can be narrated in multiple ways. So the story is the series of events, plots are what happens in a story, and the narrator can make decisions about how to tell that story. So the same story could be told in more than one way. Events, next, are units that make up the plot of a story. An event is like a slice of a story, a slice of a plot of a story. Events can be two things. They can be an act or a happening. An example of an act would be like a kick or a kiss, and a happening would be like a bolt of lightning. Now, an act is an event caused by a character, whereas happenings occur without the specific agency of a character. An agency is the capacity of an entity to cause events or engage in acts. Characters do things with their hands, with their speech, with their actions, with their words, and the outcomes of those doings, the things characters do, are called acts. When something happens in a story that was not caused by a character, like, for an example, a bolt of lightning, unless it's a mythological story, in which case maybe Zeus is causing the bolt of lightning, or Thor is causing the bolt of lightning. But generally, we see things in nature outside of human agency as being happenings, things that happen. One is more active and one is more passive. And agency is a key word. It's about how much space a character has to make things happen, to cause acts. Okay. Entities can be two types. They can be a character or an object in a story. Characters are sentient, which means they can sense things. Like a human character or an animal character would be sentient because they have brains that can that are conscious, that have cognition, an ability to think, and are connected to bodies that can sense things outside of them. Objects are insentient, which means they cannot sense things. So, for example, in this GIF, the bananas on the floor would be an object. They can't sense things, but the robot might be a character. The robot dog might be a character. It might have sensors built into it that give it an awareness of its surroundings. All right, conflict. This is one of the most important parts of story. What drives a story? Very simply, conflict is a struggle or problem. It is a struggle or problem. Most narratives are driven by one or more types of conflict. As you can see below, there's kind of two camps of conflict, two types. One is internal, like character versus self, when a character struggles with their own thoughts or feelings. And then another is external conflict, when a character struggles with something outside of themselves. So another character, character versus character, they might struggle with nature, or they might struggle with society. All of those things would be outside of the character. In ancient Greek, there's a word, agon, which you can see there. I spelled it with the Greek lettering. Those are not part of our alphabet. That's part of the Greek alphabet. It looks like an A, Y, W, V, kind of. Those are not the same letters, but that's what it looks like. And it is the word for conflict or contest. Agon is conflict or contest. Okay, coming up on the end here, protagonist and antagonist. These are words you might have heard before. From that Greek word agon, we get the words protagonist and antagonist, and hopefully you can see that agon is inside of those words. A protagonist is on one side of the conflict, and an antagonist is on the other side. Very generally and simply, we tend to think of a protagonist as the good guy and the antagonist as the bad guy. I don't find this to be a very useful way of looking at these words. I want to center us on the conflict and then the people and the characters on both sides of those conflicts, because a bad guy will probably see themselves as a good guy, and a good guy will see themselves as a good guy. Everybody sort of wants to be the protagonist in a story. That may or may not be true. I just said that, and I don't know if that's true. But I want us to focus on the who's on what side of the conflict, not necessarily this is a good guy, this is a bad guy. Those are not super useful phrases. Anyways, we think of like Batman as a protagonist and his opponents like Bane or Joker as antagonists. Okay, and then tension and suspense. These are keywords that we'll see in Apex here shortly. Tension is the suspense produced by a conflict that has not yet been resolved. Tension is the suspense produced by a conflict that has not yet been resolved. And then suspense is the feeling of not knowing what is going to happen next in a story. So both of these elements, they sort of the body, what happens to your body, you might be on the quote edge of your seat. You're like, oh my goodness, what's going to happen? Is the good guy going to win? Is the main character going to win? Are they going to lose? How is this struggle going to play out? How is the conflict going to be resolved? You don't know what's going to happen next, so you might be on the edge of your seat. That is suspense, but then tension is more broadly just what goes on when conflict has not been resolved, when a problem has not been solved or fixed. When character versus character, they don't get along, and sometimes they won't get along. Okay. Finally, I'll leave this up on the slide, but here's a little story chart to sort of bring together some of the elements. Story would be sort of the big umbrella word. A story might have multiple plots going on at the same time. A lot of TV shows will do this. It's pretty easy to see when you have one group of characters doing things over here, another group of characters doing things over here, and another group of characters doing things over here. And each of those groups of characters is living inside of their own plot, but together they're in the same world, and sometimes those plots cross over and come together in the overall story. And in each of those plots, underneath each of those plots, is just a series of events. Event A happened, event B, event C, D, E, F, G, H, I. Stories can have many, 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 many different events inside of them. Okay, we'll talk more about this in a moment. Thanks for your time. I know this was a long video. We will review the material together now in class.